Walt Whitman deserves a bridge named, and he was America's greatest poet. A patriotic American, we're going to go over that as well as his life. And at the end, stay tuned for our bonus. We're driving over the bridge. What makes Walt Whitman so great, he was a patriotic American. We're going to go over his life. He was born not in Camden. And the bridge this is a bridge named after a New Jerseyan, not a Philadelphian. In 1819, he was born in Long Island, and he moved to Brooklyn at 4 years old. And let me get him on this side. He actually met Marquis de Lafayette, the famous Frenchman who fought alongside George Washington in the Revolutionary War in 1825 when Lafayette was an old man. Supposedly he kissed him on the cheek, and Walt Whitman later wrote about that and remembers that. So that's pretty cool. That's when he was 6 years old. He lived in New York. He wasn't always in Camden, New Jersey. And he had many jobs. I mean, he started working. Back then, he started working early at like 12 as a printer. And then as a journalist, he was a teacher for a while, too. Joe Davidson, by the way, made this statue. It was a second replica. The first one is purchased, actually, by the Fairmount Art Association for the Walt Whitman Bridge, as a matter of fact. This you can see when you're going towards the Philadelphia Bridge from Pennsylvania. How much of a patriot he really was. In 1848, actually traveled to New Orleans for about 3 months. He was part of the Free Soil Movement Party. America under James Polk had won the Mexican-American War. By 1848, we had got California, what would become New Mexico, and Arizona, the rest of Texas, probably some of Utah and Colorado. And he was part of the movement along with Abraham Lincoln, really. Martin Van Buren ran on that ticket. But he was part of the movement that wanted slavery not to go west of where it was. And that was Abraham Lincoln's theory in starting and being a part of the Republican Party as soon as it began in 1854. It was the Whig Party before that. And he didn't actually write his famous poem, Leaves of Grass, until 1855. So, and it's not even a poem, it's a collection of poems. Originally, the first edition, it was 12 poems. By one of them that was famous was Out by the Cradle Rocking. And that poem was controversial, right? Controversial, because there was some supposedly sensuality in it, or what have you. He would later on be censored for a while, even during the Civil War, and we're going to talk about that. He was an Abraham Lincoln supporter. He was a man who was an individualist. In the Leaves of Grass, he has a picture of himself where he imagined himself in work clothes as like the common man, kind of a frontiersman in a way. He was for the frontier in America, for expanding America. And the common man, he was a champion of the common man. He was also a very religious man. In his poems, there's divinity of the soul, the individual soul. He was an individualist. By the Civil War, and that was in 1855, and by the Civil War, published 9 editions of Leaves of Grass. And again, at the end, it was up to 400 poems from 12. And he would keep changing where the poems were in his book. He would kind of shift them around. He would add, he would subtract, he would edit. He was the father of free verse in poetry. So what does that mean? Well, poetry before Walt Whitman, maybe he didn't start it, but he made it famous, was metered, and the sentences were a certain length. And he was more of a free spirit. The words, the sounds that he put in his poems, he had this mythical I in it, and a lot, honestly. If you look at his works, like Lilacs, he would have Sea Drift, he would have Words of Passage, famous, and many others, Poems of Joy. He was prolific. And I heard about him first and I knew about him in school. And by the way, my name is Mike, and this is Local History with Mike. And I am from Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which is right over the Walt Whitman Bridge. It's about 5 miles from Camden. That's all it is. And I had never seen, by the way, Walt Whitman's statue here. I didn't even know it existed before I looked this up to do this video. Strange that this is not more famous, this statue. It should be. And Joe Davidson did an incredible job. It's a light foot. It looks like he's walking. I should really get it closer up. Maybe I will at the end. During the Civil War, he actually wounded, and Confederates and Union alike. He didn't, we were all Americans. He was anti-slavery, of course. He was for the Union, and he was for Abraham Lincoln. But he cared for, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. We were all Americans. He was pro-American. He's a patriot. He would eulogize Abraham Lincoln, who was shot, of course, by John Wilkes Booth in 1865, in Lilacs, in where I had heard of him first as a poet and knew his actual poetry, because I never read all of his poetry when I was young, was "O Captain, O Captain." And it does go. And I heard about it in Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. And that movie. Robin Williams is a comedian, but this was not a funny movie. He played John Keating, a poet, history teacher. And at the end, he's dismissed. He's dismissed because he reads the O Captain, poem to them, or at least tells them about it. And at the end, the boys, and I don't want to give a spoiler alert, but I'm going to, is they stand on the desk when he is dismissed. And this other professor talks about the metered poetry and those sentence lengths again. And they stand on it and they say to him, O Captain, O Captain. And they all stand on the desks. And he says, thank you, boys. Maybe I'll get copyrighted for that, maybe not, I don't know. Something. You should see Dead Poets Society, please. And that was in 1989. And he died in 1882. He lived to 73 years old. And again, it was 9 editions that he published. And he kept making money from it. He didn't actually move to Camden until 1873 with his brother, who fought in the Civil War at Fredericksburg and was injured. But he suffered a stroke, Walt Whitman, in 1872, and he moved in with his brother in his brother's house in Camden, New Jersey. And later on, by 1881, he had published with a Philadelphia editor another edition of Leaves of Grass. Of course, he had many of them, and could buy what they called a cottage. We'll just call it a house. I'll show it to you at some point here, in Camden, and it can be visited. So he lived there towards the end of his life, and he died in Camden, New Jersey. And Camden only became Camden, actually, in 1828. So it was incorporated. It was the story of his life. He again, a great American patriot. And you're going to see us going over the bridge, so stay tuned for that. It's enormous. So we're coming up on the Walt Whitman Bridge. As you can see, actually on the right-hand side, you would go towards the Ben Franklin Bridge. On the left-hand side here, you go towards Philadelphia and the Walt Whitman Bridge as we approach this enormous bridge. And it is the largest, longest bridge that goes to Philadelphia from New Jersey, actually Gloucester City, not Camden itself, where Walt Whitman lived. So we're on the bridge now. You can see the towers and how enormous this bridge is. It goes up about 375 feet, and the clearance for the Delaware River, which we're going over right now, is about 150 feet. I think it's even higher than the Ben Franklin Bridge for clearance. This bridge is not the longest bridge to go over the Delaware River, however. That belongs to another bridge, and I'm going to see if anybody in the comments can tell me what that bridge is. We haven't done it yet on this series, the bridge series, but leave that in the comments below. Let's say this bridge was also built. It took 4 years, from 53 to 1957. It was completed and opened. And I want to give a shout out to, go check their channel out, Jim and Tabs. They may be as old as this bridge. They can tell me in the comments below. We'll see. This is also where you go when I was young to Citizens Bank Park. I'm going to try to have it over here. Perhaps you can see it, perhaps you can't. Lincoln Financial Field, the sports centers. This is where I went with my dad and my mom and my brothers when we would go to Phillies games at the old Veterans Stadium before it became Citizens Bank Park, or we went to what was the Spectrum, which is now the Wells Fargo Center. So the sports complexes are right here, and we're going to the Walt Whitman step. So this is the cash only lane. It is $6. It's